Hello and welcome. Today we're going to be examining the analysis of variance tool that we have. Essentially, it's going to allow us to do t-tests between multiple groups. Remember, with the independent t-test, we were kind of restricted between looking at the mean between just two groups. A dichotomous variable, for all intents and purposes, is what we used. However, what if you have a variable that has multiple categories and you want to compare all of those categories against one another, essentially? You could just run a series of multiple t-tests, but it'd take a long time. Here's a little bit of a trick, a different tool that we can use simply to examine the means between different groupings within a variable. So once again, we're going to be using statistical package for the social sciences, SPSS. We're going to be using version 23, but once again, all these commands should backtrack, extend to any of the previous versions and hopefully into future versions. And we're going to also be using the federal sentencing data set for 2006. Once again, this is a subsample. And what we've done today too is we have restricted our sample of over 72,000 cases simply to 1,000 cases. This will give us enough variation to kind of look at, hopefully find some statistical differences. By controlling our sample size to some degree. I'm kind of fishing for a nice cushy little sample here to kind of demonstrate and contrast some things. But at the same thing, it allows us to do a little playing without the whole shebang. Once again, 72,000 cases, you're going to find statistical significance in almost anything as a general rule, solely based on that large sample size. So what we're going to do today is we're going to examine two variables. We're going to examine education, which is technically an ordinal variable, and we can do that. We're just going to treat it as if it were categorical, though. So we have the category of 1 being less than high school, 2 graduating high school, 3 having some college, or 4 completing college with a college degree. We're going to examine this based on the number of months an individual was sentenced. So the hypothesis we're really testing here is, do people of different educational levels receive different sentences by judges? So we're only looking at the relationship between those two things. We're not controlling for a variety of other factors such as sentence severity, prior history, or other non-legal factors that we do tend to find as being statistically significant within the sentencing literature. However, let's jump into this as an example. So beforehand, when we were simply doing a t-test, we went down to compare means and we would go over to independent samples t-test. But once again, this was only good if we had two categories that we were comparing against each other. So we examined the average sentence length between men and women, testing the hypothesis of, is there a difference between gender? What we're going to do today, though, is since we have multiple groups in there, we want to compare all of them. We don't want to run an individual t-test for less than high school and high school graduate, and less than high school some college, and less than high school completed college, and then we don't want to run all of those individual tests. We want to do it all at one time. So we're going to use the One-Way ANOVA test. And this is once again going to allow us to do the comparison between these groups. So we can go down here and pull in our education variable, and this is going to be our factor. We're just going to pull it on over, so much like the grouping variable, but in this case it's going to examine all of the different categories essentially of education in our situation 4, and we're also going to examine the months in prison the individual was sentenced to, so we're going to drag that over into our dependent list. However, there's a really important thing that we got to grab here on the right hand side. We're going to grab a post hoc test. So this basically is requesting additional information after the fact, and we are going to request or ask for the two-key analysis. This is going to give us the exact values between each one of those categories. We're going to use the standard significance level of 0.05, a pretty solid standard within the social sciences. Once again, this may change depending on your sample, depending on the questions you're asking. We're just going to run with 0.05 because it is fairly standard within the social sciences. So we click continue. We got months in the dependent list. We have our factor as education. Let's run this. So we click OK. And once again, so keep in mind, we're just running a sample of 1,000 of our cases in here. But this first grouping, this first box, is basically looking at the variation between and within groups. So basically, how much sentences vary within each one of those groupings. So within college graduate, within some college, within high school graduate, and within some high school. So it's looking at how much variation there is between each of those, or within each one of those categories. And then this is examining how much variation or how much difference there are between the groups. And it's really comparing the differences between to the differences within. So this gives us a value of F statistic, which is really the ratio of between versus within variation, and a statistical significance indicator, which basically tells us 0.00. So this is under the 0.05 threshold. So what this means is that there is a difference between these groups. However, the problem becomes, are all the groups different or only some of them? And this is why we requested the post hoc test. Okay, so for the ANOVA itself, yes, it is statistically significant, meaning there is a difference in between at least one of these categories when we're examining sentence length. However, the question becomes, is it all of them, or is there just one relationship, or is there some mix between? When we look at the post hoc tests, once again, we just ran the 2 key analysis, we're requesting the actual individual differences for each one of these groups. So for when we're starting at the less than high school group, so this is the lowest educational group, and start comparing against all the other groups, we can see, is there a sentence difference? So when we take the less than high school against the high school graduate, we find there's a 15 month difference between those sentences, particularly when we take less than high school and subtract high school graduates. So this means that individuals who were in the category of less than high school had lower sentences than the high school graduates. Kind of odd. But when you compare against the sum graduate and college graduate, we find out that these values were more, college graduates received higher sentences, and so did some college. We can also find that the differences between them, 15 months, 21 months, and 29 months, is statistically significant in all these situations. So for each one of these, basically, this is your individual t-test that it's running all of these combinations for you. And we can find that there is a statistically significant difference between less than high school and high school graduate. There is a statistically significant difference between less than high school and some college. And there is a statistically significant difference between less than high school and college graduate. Once again, we know this because all of these values are below 0.05. But if we look to some of these other combinations, we can actually find some that there is not a statistically significant difference. In this situation, we find that some college and college graduate, there's only a difference of about 7 months. Now, once again, based on the sample size and the standard deviation, we actually find this is not statistically significant. 0.897, clearly well above 0.05. So in this situation, we would say that there is not a statistically significant difference when it comes to sentencing between college, individuals who have some college and individuals who have a college degree. So this really helps us to kind of understand the differences between all of these groups. It allows us to examine the statistically significant relationships between all of these categories without having to run t-tests for each and every one of them. Now, once again, if you're simply interested in just a relationship between one or two, the t-test might be easier. However, if you want to know all of them, this is a nice and easy way to run it. So once again, all you need is one variable that is a metric level variable, that's ratio or interval level variable that you can use to calculate a mean, and then some type of categorical variable. If you're running an ANOVA, you need to have 3 or more categories for it really to make any sense. Hopefully this has helped, given you another tool that you could run. But once again, if you get confused and don't feel comfortable, you could just run individual t-tests for each one of your groups. I hope this has helped. Good luck. If you have any questions or things that pop up, don't hesitate to contact me. Good luck with your data analysis.